On the night of November the 3rd, 1889, a lantern burned at the end of Dead Man's Wharf. It had no business being there. The wharf had been condemned for 7 years. The warehouses behind it stood empty. The pilings were rotten, the boards slick with weed and tar, and yet the lantern burned. Not flickering, not guttering, burning steady, as though someone had trimmed the wick just an hour before. You can also listen to all of these stories on Spotify. Link to them is in the description. A river constable named Albert Pike saw the light from his patrol boat at 20 minutes past 3 in the morning. He thought, at first, that it was a smuggler's signal. He nosed the boat closer. He shouted a challenge. No one answered. What he found when he climbed onto those rotten boards and walked the length of the wharf was a dead man. Face down, one hand still reaching toward the lantern, as though in his last moment he had been trying to put it out. There were no footprints but his own. No boat tied at the wharf. No way for anyone to have come and gone. The tide had been out for 2 hours, and the mud below the planks was undisturbed. And yet a man had been murdered there. 3 days later, the case was brought to a small consulting room at 21B Baker Street and laid before a tall, thin man in a mouse-coloured dressing gown who had not slept in 2 nights, and who, upon hearing the particulars, smiled for the first time that week. This is the story of the lantern of Dead Man's Wharf, of a body that could not have been killed where it lay, of a widow who wept for a man she had every reason to hate, of a watchman with kind eyes and a daughter he loved more than his own life, and of how Sherlock Holmes, working from nothing more than a smudge of soot, the price of lamp oil, and the silence of a woman who would not speak, brought down the cleverest murderer he had ever known. It was the 6th of November, and London had not seen the sun for 9 days. The fog, that autumn, had been the thickest in living memory. It pressed against the windows of Baker Street like a living thing, yellow at the edges, grey at the heart. Lamps were lit at noon. Cabs moved at a walking pace. Sounds came from impossible directions, and people lost their way on streets they had walked for 40 years. I had returned from my morning rounds from chilled to the bone and was just settling, seized to my armchair with a cup of Mrs. Hudson's tea, when Holmes spoke without lifting his eyes from the newspaper. "Tell me, Watson," he said, "what is your professional opinion of a man who has been dead 3 days, drowned in salt water, with no salt water in his lungs?" I looked up. That would be a curious case of drowning. It would indeed be a curious case of drowning. He passed the paper across to me. The article was small, set in below a column on the price of wheat. Body discovered at disused wharf. Police baffled. The man's name was Edmund Carstairs, a shipping clerk, 41 years of age, of Wapping. He had been found at 3 in the morning on a wharf that had not seen lawful traffic in 7 years. "Drowned without water," I said. "How can that be?" "That, my dear Watson, is what Inspector Bradstreet would very much like to know. He called on me last night while you were attending to your patient in Marylebone. He left a note." Holmes gestured to the mantelpiece. "He is bringing the widow at 11. I glanced at the clock. It was 22. "And what was your impression of the inspector's note?" "That he is a competent man stretched beyond his competence, which makes him a great deal more useful than a clever man who believes himself a genius. He has done the work. The work has yielded nothing. He is wise enough to admit it." He stood at the window for a long moment, looking down into the fog where Baker Street should have been. "There are 3 points that interest me, Watson. 3 points only. The rest, I imagine, is dressing." He turned and raised one long finger. "First, A wharf which has not been used for 7 years. A wharf with no boats moored, no footprints save the victim's own, and no other means of approach. A wharf which is, for all practical purposes, an island in the middle of a city. A second finger. Second, a lantern, burning, trimmed, recently filled. Hung from a post at the end of that wharf, in plain view of the river, on the foggiest night of the year. A lantern which the victim, in his last moments, was reaching toward. A third finger. Third, a widow who, by all reports of the inspector's first interview, did not weep, did not faint, did not ask how. She asked only one question. He paused. What was the question? I asked. She asked whether her husband had been carrying his pocketbook. There was a soft tread on the stair, and then Mrs. Hudson's knock. Inspector Bradstreet, Mr. Holmes, and the lady. Inspector Bradstreet I had met before, a broad, square-shouldered man with mutton-chop whiskers and the patient eyes of someone who had spent 20 years listening to lies, with no expression at all. He was a sensible policeman. He was here because his sense had run out. The woman beside him was perhaps 30. Pale, but not waxen, slender. Dressed entirely in black, the crepe still new, the smell of it sharp in the room. Her veil was pushed back, her hair was very dark, her eyes were dry. "Mr. Holmes," said Bradstreet. "Dr. Watson, may I present Mrs. Edmund Carstairs?" "Mrs. Carstairs." Holmes bowed slightly and indicated the chair before the fire. "Please, sit. You have come a long way on a cold morning, and the inspector tells me you have refused breakfast. Mrs. Hudson will bring tea." "I do not require tea," she said. Her voice was low, even. There was no tremor in it. "Then I shall have some, and you may watch me drink it. Watson, the bell." Holmes settled into his chair opposite hers. He did not look at her at first. He looked at the fire. "Mrs. Carstairs, I shall ask you 3 questions. 2 of them will seem to you indelicate. I beg you, in the matter of your husband's murderer, to answer them as fully as you can. Will you do that?" A long pause. "Yes. First, when did you last see your husband alive?" "On the evening of the 2nd. He left the house at about 7:30. He did not say where he was going. Was that unusual? No?" "Second, when the inspector came to tell you of your husband's death, he reports that you asked only a one question. Whether he had been carrying his pocketbook. Why did you ask that?" She did not answer at once. She looked at the fire. Then she looked at Holmes. "Because, if he had been carrying it, I should have known whether he had been to see her." Bradstreet's eyebrows rose. "Her, madam?" "My husband kept a small leather notebook in his pocketbook," said Mrs. Carstairs. "In it, he wrote the addresses of certain women. He thought I did not know. He was not a clever man, Inspector." "And was the pocketbook on him when he was found?" Holmes asked. "It was not," said Bradstreet. "Then he had been to see her," said Mrs. Carstairs. "Whoever she was that night." There was a silence in the room. The fire cracked. Somewhere outside, a hansom went by, the horse's hooves muffled in the fog. "My third question," said Holmes. "Was your husband a wealthy man, Mrs. Carstairs?" "No." "Was he in debt?" "That is a 4th question." "Forgive me. Was he in debt?" "He was not. He had no money. He had no debts. He kept a clerk's position at Whitby and Cobb in the Pool of London, and he drew a clerk's wages, and we lived in 3 rooms in Wapping, above a tobacconist's. He had no expectations. He had no investments. He had nothing." She paused. "I do not know why anyone would have killed him, Mr. Holmes. He was not worth killing, and yet someone did." "Yes." Holmes leaned forward. "Mrs. Carstairs, did your husband ever speak of Dead Man's Wharf?" "No." "Of any wharf?" "No." "Did he ever come home with his clothing wet, or smelling of the river, or with tar upon his shoes?" A pause. "Sometimes." Not often, but sometimes. When? On Tuesdays. On Tuesdays. Always on Tuesdays? Always. And the night he died was a Tuesday. Holmes sat back in his chair. He pressed his fingertips together beneath his chin. Inspector, I should like to see the Wharf. I should like to see it at the same hour at which Constable Pike discovered the body. I should like to see what tide and what fog and what lantern light the murderer saw, if there was a murderer at the Wharf at all, which I begin to doubt. Watson, your service revolver. We have, I think, an interesting 48 hours ahead of us. We did not go to the Wharf at once. Holmes, as was his habit, preferred to approach a problem from its edges and work inward. He spent the rest of that day in places that had nothing apparent to do with Edmund Carstairs. He spent an hour at the offices of Whitby and Cobb, where the dead man had worked. He spent another at the Wapping police station, going over Bradstreet's notes with a magnifying glass. He spent a third in the back room of a public house called the Three Crowns, where he was known to the landlord and where he asked questions that I could not hear. He returned to Baker Street at 9:30 in the evening. He ate 2 pieces of toast. He drank a cup of black coffee. He smoked 1 pipe. Then he turned to me. Watson, there is one thing about this case that I find more interesting than all the others combined. Will you tell me what it is? I would have said the lantern. The lantern is interesting, but the lantern is, so to speak, the dressing of the case. The interesting thing about this case is that Edmund Carstairs went to that wharf on Tuesdays, every Tuesday, for some period of time we do not yet know, and on the last Tuesday of his life he went, and he did not come back. He was meeting someone, or he was doing something, or both. Whatever it was secret, it was regular, and it was, in some sense, his life. His wife knew. She did not know what it was, but she knew the rhythm of it, and on the night he died, the rhythm broke. He unrolled the chart on the table between us. He set his pipe at one corner to hold it flat. Dead Man's Wharf. Here. His finger touched a point on the north bank, downriver of the tower. Now, the wharf is condemned. The warehouses behind it are owned by a man called Henniker, who lives in Hampshire and has not visited the property in 8 years. The wharf is fenced from the street. The fence is in poor repair, but it is a fence, and a man going to that wharf for any innocent purpose would have to climb it, or go round by the mud. There is no innocent purpose to go there at all. Quite so. Holmes traced a line along the river, but there is a great deal of unwatched water just there. The river police patrol it once an hour. A boat coming up on the tide could land at Dead Man's Wharf, transact its business, and be gone in 12 minutes. No one would see, no one would hear. The fog of this autumn would smother any sound louder than a pistol shot. Smuggling. Smuggling is the obvious explanation. But Watson, I do not love obvious explanations, and I love them least when they explain too much. Smuggling does not require a lantern. Why should it not? Because a smuggler's signal is a flash, not a hold. A smuggler shows light for 10 seconds and douses it. The lantern at Dead Man's Wharf burned for at least 6 hours. The constable said it was steady when he found it. There was enough oil in the reservoir when the police measured it the following morning to indicate that it had been filled and lit at perhaps 9 o'clock the previous evening. 9 o'clock! 9 o'clock! And Carstairs left his house at 7:30. He had an hour and a half, more than enough time to make his way to Wapping, climb the fence, walk the wharf and light the lantern himself. You think he lit it himself? I think it likely. I think it very likely indeed. He went there on Tuesdays. Whatever he did at that wharf, he did under that lantern. The lantern, Watson, was not the murderers. The lantern was the victim's. Then what does the lantern mean? That, my dear Watson, is what we shall learn tomorrow night at 3 in the morning when we walk the wharf as Constable Pike walked it. Sleep well. We shall be cold. We left Baker Street at 1 in the morning. The fog had thinned a little after midnight, but as we descended toward the river it thickened again, and, by the time the cab let us down at the corner of Wapping High Street, we could not see 10 feet in any direction. Inspector Bradstreet was waiting for us, with a constable I did not know and a bullseye lantern. He did not speak. He led us down a side lane between 2 warehouses to a wooden fence with a gate that had once been locked but was no longer. The gate stood open 6 inches. Was it open like this when Pike came through? Asked Holmes. It was. He noted it in his report. Curious. We passed through the gate. Beyond the gate, a short flight of stone steps descended to the wharf itself. The wharf was perhaps 120 feet long and 20 feet wide. Wooden planks, many of them rotten. 2 posts at the far end, one of which had once held a lantern. The river was beyond, invisible. We could hear it lapping at the pilings below. "Walk it as Pike walked it," said Holmes. Slowly. "Do not speak." We walked the length of the wharf in silence. At the far end, Holmes stopped. He turned. He looked back the way we had come. He looked at the river. He looked at the lantern post. He looked, for a very long time, at the boards beneath his feet. Then he knelt. He produced his lens from his coat pocket and bent so close to the wood that his nose nearly touched it. He moved the lens along the planks in a slow grid. He did this for 15 minutes. The constable shifted from foot to foot. Bradstreet stood quite still, his breath fogging in the cold air. At last Holmes stood. "Inspector, was there blood?" "A great deal beneath the body, soaked into the boards. And further up the wharf, at, let us say, this point here." He moved 7 or 8 feet back toward the gate. "None that we found. None at all. Nah. And you would say, would you not, that a man stabbed with the wound Carstairs had, a wound severing the left subclavian artery, would bleed a great deal, and would bleed at once, and would bleed wherever he was struck and wherever he walked thereafter?" "I would," said Bradstreet. "And so would the police surgeon." "Then Edmund Carstairs was not stabbed where he fell." There was a pause. "He could not have walked far, Mr. Holmes, not with that wound." "He did not walk far. He walked from here." Holmes tapped the chalked X. "To there." He pointed at the place the body had lain. 7 feet, 6 inches. He was stabbed at the point I have marked. He fell where you found him. The lantern was hung after he fell, because the post is here.
He indicated the post 6 feet from the body's position.
And a dying man could not have hung a lantern with that wound. And he was reaching toward the lantern when he died. Not from it, which means the lantern was already lit when he was struck. He was looking at it. "You are saying," said Bradstreet slowly, "that he was struck looking at his own lantern." "I am saying he was struck while looking at his lantern. Whether it was his own remains to be seen." He knelt again. This time he scraped at the boards at the chalked X with the edge of his lens. "There was blood here," he said. "A drop. Possibly 2. The constables missed it because they were looking at the larger stain. Bradstreet, I require the police surgeon's report on the depth and angle of the wound. You shall have it in the morning." "Excellent." Holmes rose. He brushed his trousers. He turned to the lantern post. "The lantern was found hanging from this hook, Inspector?" "It was. At what height?" "Eye level. About 5 feet 8. "Carstairs' height?" 5 feet 10. Then the lantern was hung by a man of average or slightly less than average height. A man would tend to hang a lantern just above his own eyeline, so that he might walk beneath without striking his head, and so that the light might fall before him. Holmes touched the hook. There is no soot upon the hook itself. The lantern, when hung, was already burning steadily. Soot accumulates in the first minutes of burning, when the wick is settling. If the lantern was hung after lighting, there should be a faint deposit on the iron. There is none. Therefore the lantern was either hung first and then lit in place, or it had been burning long enough before being hung that the wick had ceased to soot. Which means I have not yet enough information. Watson, the lantern itself, it is in police custody? It is at Wapping Station. Then to Wapping Station. Bradstreet, I shall want to see the body. I know it has been 3 days. I want to see it nonetheless. We left the wharf as we had come, in silence. Bradstreet, he said at last, who knew that Carstairs came to this wharf on Tuesdays? His wife, evidently. Anyone else? Not that we have found. There must be someone else. A man does not come to a place like this for years and remain unobserved. There is a watchman. There is a man named Pegram. He has the keys to 3 warehouses on this side of the cut. The wharf itself is not his to watch, but he passes it on his rounds. And he saw nothing on the night of the murder? He saw nothing. He was on the other side of the cut at the time, by his own account. He was the man who first heard the constable's whistle. He came at once. Mr. Pegram. I shall want to speak with Mr. Pegram. He lives in a cottage at the end of Pelican Stairs. His daughter keeps house for him. I can have him brought to the station. No, I shall call upon him. There is more to be learned of a man in his own house than in yours. We did not go to Pegram's at once. Holmes wished to think. He sat in the back parlour of an inn called the Town of Ramsgate, which sits not far from the river. He drank a glass of porter. He did not speak. He watched the fire. At 9 in the morning he stood. Watson. We shall first call upon the widow once more, and then upon Mr. Pegram. I have a question for the widow which I did not ask yesterday, because I did not yet know it was a question. What is the question? You shall hear it when I ask it. The Carstairses had lived above the tobacconists, as the widow had said. A narrow stair, a small landing, 3 rooms. Mrs. Carstairs received us in the front parlour. She wore the same black gown. She looked, I thought, a little less composed than she had at Baker Street, but only a little. Her hands were no longer folded. She held a small dark book in her lap. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I did not expect you so soon. Forgive the intrusion, madam. I have a question, one only, and then we shall leave you. She inclined her head. What was your husband doing on the wharf? Her face did not change. I have already told you, Mr. Holmes. I do not know. That is not the question I asked. I asked what he was doing, not what you knew of it. A long silence. Mr. Holmes, I have spent 4 years in 3 rooms above a tobacconist's, married to a man whom I did not love, and who did not love me. I knew the smell of his coat when he came home. I knew the dust upon his boots. I knew, by what he did not say, that he was occupied in something which he did not wish me to know. I did not ask. I did not, in truth, care. He left me in peace on Tuesdays, and that was all I required of him. She paused. I cannot tell you what he was doing. I can tell you only this. He went out clean, and he came back changed. He came back sometimes frightened. He came back once with blood upon his cuff. Blood? Not much. A smear at the edge of the linen. He saw me see it. He said nothing. He took the shirt off and burned it in the grate. When was this? In August. Mrs. Carstairs. The book in your lap, is it his? She looked down. She seemed, for a moment, to have forgotten it. It is. I found it this morning. In the lining of a coat I had not yet given to the ragman. May I? She handed it to him. Holmes read for perhaps 2 minutes. He turned the pages slowly. His expression did not alter. But I, who had known him 15 years, saw the line of his jaw tighten. He closed the book. Mrs. Carstairs, may I take this with me? You may take it and burn it, Mr. Holmes, for all I care. I shall return it, or what is left of it. Good day, madam. We shall trouble you again, I think, but not soon. What does the book contain, Holmes? He did not answer at once. He walked with his head down, the book in his pocket, his hand upon it. It contains, Watson, the reason Edmund Carstairs is dead. It contains the names, or rather the initials, of 19 persons. Against each pair of initials there is a sum. Against each sum there is a date. The earliest is from June of last year. The latest is from the 2nd of November, the night before he died. Blackmail! Blackmail! Of the simplest and most squalid sort. 19 people, Watson. 19 people whom Edmund Carstairs, that mild and unremarkable clerk, was bleeding white, one Tuesday at a time. Then any of 19 people might have killed him. Any, and one of them, I think, did. There is a pattern to the entries, however, which interests me. Most of the names appear once or twice and then cease, as though Carstairs took what he could and let them go. But 3 of the initials recur month after month. Steady, disciplined. Carstairs was bleeding them slowly, that they might bleed for years. Those 3 persons, Watson, are the ones to whom we must give our attention, and one of those 3 has the initials J.P. He stopped. He looked at me. J.P., as in Joseph Pegram, perhaps. The watchman. Holmes. The watchman is being blackmailed by Carstairs, was being blackmailed. The entries against J.P. go back almost 12 months. 5 shillings a week. Modest. Sustainable. Cruel. And on the 2nd of November, the day before Carstairs' death, there is one final entry. Against the initials J.P., there is no sum. Only a single word. What word? Daughter. Joseph Pegram's cottage was at the foot of Pelican Stairs. He answered the door himself. He was a man perhaps 60 years of age, broad in the shoulder, with a grey beard cut short and the sort of weathered, careful face that one sees among men who have spent their lives near the water. He wore a clean shirt. His eyes were the very pale blue of a winter sky. Mr. Pegram, I am Sherlock Holmes. This is Dr. Watson. We are assisting Inspector Bradstreet in the matter of the man who died at the wharf. I should be obliged if we might come in. He looked at us for a long moment. You had better come in, then. He stood aside. The cottage was very clean. A single room downstairs, with a fire in the grate and a small table laid for 2. A staircase to a loft above. Curtains at the windows. The work of careful hands. A canary in a wicker cage by the window. Silent. A young woman was seated by the fire with a book in her lap. She was perhaps 20. She had her father's pale blue eyes and a face that had once been pretty and was now thin and shadowed. She looked up when we entered. She did not rise. My daughter, sirs. Alice? Alice, these gentlemen are about the business at the wharf. She nodded. She did not speak. Miss Pegram, said Holmes with a bow. We shall not trouble you for long, Mr. Pegram. May we sit? We sat. Holmes looked at the watchman for some time. Pegram returned his gaze. The girl looked at the fire. Mr. Pegram, you have lived in this cottage how long? 18 years, sir, since my wife died. I came down from Limehouse to be nearer the work. And the work has been watchman for the warehouses at Henniker's Wharf? That and others. I keep 3 sets of keys. I walk the rounds twice in the night. I am paid 18 shillings a week, a modest sum. It is what I am paid, sir. You knew Edmund Carstairs? A pause. the smallest pause. I knew him by sight. He came to the wharf sometimes. On Tuesdays. I could not say what day. Mr. Pegram, on the night of the 2nd, you were on your rounds. Where were you between 9 and midnight? On the south side of the cut. I have a logbook. The inspector has seen it. I am sure he has. And between midnight and 3 in the morning? At Henniker's No. 2 warehouse, sir. Doing the inventory, there had been a complaint of a broken seal. At 3 you heard the constable's whistle. I heard a whistle. I came at once. How long did it take you to reach the wharf from Henniker's No. 2? 9 minutes, sir. I am no longer young. You were the first man at the scene after Constable Pike. I was. Did you see the lantern? I saw it. What did you make of it? I made nothing of it, Mr. Holmes. It was a lantern. It was burning. You did not wonder how a lantern came to be burning at a disused wharf at 3 in the morning? I wondered. I had no answer. You did not, perhaps, put out the lantern when you arrived? I did not, sir, the constable said, to leave all as it was. I left all as it was. Mr. Pegram, I shall ask you one further question. Did you know Edmund Carstairs by name? A silence. Yes, sir. How did you come to know him? A longer silence. He came to my door, sir, once, in June of last year. Why did he come to your door? Pegram did not answer. The girl in the chair turned her head, very slowly, and looked at her father. Father. Hush, Alice. Father, if these gentlemen... Hush. She lowered her head again. Mr. Holmes, said Pegram, I will not answer that question. Not now. Not in this room. If you require me to answer it, you will require me to do so at the station in the presence of the inspector, and with my daughter not present. I will say nothing of any matter that touches my Alice. I will say nothing of it here. I will say nothing of it ever if I am not made to. That is all I shall say, sir. Holmes regarded him for a long moment. Then he rose. Mr. Pegram, I thank you for your time. We shall trouble you no further this morning. Miss Pegram, good day. The book on your lap, if I may say so, is well chosen. Trollope is a kind companion in difficult times. She looked up. For the first time she almost smiled. You know the book, sir? I know it. The Warden. A fine, quiet thing. Good day. Holmes. He is the murderer. He is a man with a motive. He is not necessarily the murderer. He all but confessed. He all but confessed to something. I am not yet certain it was the murder. There is a great deal more to this, Watson. The lantern still puzzles me. The widow still puzzles me. The wound in Edmund Carstairs' chest still puzzles me. And there is one matter, the most puzzling of all, which I cannot put my finger on, but which I shall before the day is out. Come, we shall have luncheon, and I shall think. We did not finish luncheon. We had taken a chop and a glass of beer each at a respectable house in Leadenhall Street, and Holmes was halfway through a long silence, broken only by the tapping of his knife against the rim of his plate, when a telegraph boy entered the room and asked for him by name. He read the message twice. He folded it. He laid it on the table. Watson, the case has accelerated. There has been a second death. At the wharf? Not at the wharf. At a lodging house in Stepney. A man called Caleb Withers, who, until last night, was a clerk in the same firm as Edmund Carstairs. He has been found in his bed, dead, a pistol in his hand, a note upon the bedside table. Suicide. So Bradstreet believes. The note has been copied for me by the inspector himself, who has been so good as to send it along. It reads, I cannot live with what I have done. I killed Edmund Carstairs. May God forgive me. May he forgive us both. Holmes, that settles it. Surely he was the murderer. Watson, do you believe Withers killed Carstairs? I believe what the note says. It is the simplest explanation. It is the simplest explanation, and therefore I do not believe it. Come! The lodging house was a tall, narrow, tired building in a row of tall, narrow, tired buildings. Caleb Withers had occupied a single room on the second floor. The landlady, a Mrs. Henning, was a stout woman who had been crying, and who now wished us to know how much she had cried. Bradstreet was waiting on the upper landing. Mr. Holmes, we have not moved the body. The surgeon has been. He puts the death between 2 and 4 this morning. A few hours then before the constable would have come for him. A few hours. Indeed. Holmes paused in the doorway. He looked at the room. He did not move forward at once. Bradstreet. The position of the body when found. As you see it. The maid found him at 7 this morning, when she brought up his coffee. He took coffee in his room? Always. It was part of the arrangement with the lodging. Was he in the habit of locking his door at night? Always. Was the door locked this morning? It was. The maid had a key. From outside or from inside? A pause. From outside, the maid said. The bolt on the inside was not drawn. The bolt was not drawn. It was not. A man who locks his door every night, and who has come home to die by his own hand, does not draw the bolt. Curious. Watson, do you observe? It might mean only that he was distracted by his intent. It might. Or it might mean that he did not draw it, because he did not draw it, because he did not lock the door at all, and someone else turned the key behind them on the way out. He examined the keyhole for a long minute. He examined the door jamb. He examined the carpet at the threshold. He examined, finally, the room itself. He stopped at the writing desk. A blotter, a pen, an inkwell, an empty space upon the blotter where a sheet of paper had recently lain. He examined the blotter. Bradstreet. The note. Was it written here? It is presumed so. The hand matches a sample of Withers's writing the firm sent over an hour ago. And the blotter shows the impression of the note in mirror. Excellent. Withers wrote the note at this desk. That confirms it then. That confirms only that the note was written at this desk by a hand that resembles Withers's. It does not confirm when or under what circumstances, or whether the man who wrote it was free to refuse. Watson, your professional opinion. The pistol? It is a small revolver, Webley type, single barrel. There is powder residue on the hand, and the wound is at the right temple. He was right-handed. He was. And the position is consistent with self-inflicted? It is. What troubles you, Mr. Holmes? What troubles me, Bradstreet, is the smell. The smell? There is no smell of powder in this room. There was a silence. A pistol fired in a closed room at 3 in the morning. By 7, the smell should still be discernible. By 11, when we arrived, it should still be faint upon the air. There is no such smell. There is the smell of cold tea, the smell of damp wool, the smell of the river through the window which is open 1 inch, as you can see. The smell of a man who has not bathed in 3 days, and the smell of pipe ash. There is no smell of gunpowder. There is also no powder upon the pillow, which there should be, given the angle. There is no scorch upon the bedclothes. There is no blood spatter upon the headboard, which there must be, given the wound. There is blood upon the pillow beneath the head. There is none anywhere else. You are saying, I am saying, that Mr. Caleb Withers was shot somewhere else, brought here, arranged in this bed, and the pistol placed in his hand. I am saying that the door was locked behind the man who did it, and the key returned. I am saying that the note upon the bedside table was either written under duress at this desk yesterday, or some days before, and brought here this morning along with the body, or, and this is more probable that the note was written by Withers in his own hand at this desk in answer to a request from someone he trusted, who told him the wording, who told him it was for some other purpose entirely, and then that person killed him for it. Mr. Holmes, that is a great deal to read from a missing smell. It is the most a missing smell has ever told me, Bradstreet. But the smell is only the beginning. Look, the dead man's slippers. They are by the wardrobe. They are dry. He came in dry. The street last night was wet. The fog was a soaking fog. A man who walked home through it would have wet slippers, wet shoes, wet cuffs. The slippers are dry. The shoes are also dry. He opened the wardrobe. There is one pair, and they are dry. Caleb Withers did not walk home last night. He was brought home, and he was already dead when he arrived. Then there are two murderers. There is, one murderer. There has always been one murderer. The lantern, Watson. The lantern is the key, and I have been a fool not to see it until now. I have been 3 days a fool. Bradstreet, where is the lantern? At the station, as you asked. Take me to it. At once. The lantern itself was an ordinary thing. A bullseye lantern of the kind one might buy at any chandler's. Iron frame. Glass panels darkened with soot. A small reservoir for oil at the base. A wick that had been trimmed, then burned, then trimmed again in a regular pattern, as though it were used often and cared for by a particular hand. He sniffed the reservoir. Whale oil, of a particular grade, not common, used principally by rivermen and by certain warehouses where naked flame is forbidden, but very steady light is required. That is consistent with smuggling. It is consistent with a number of things, including the watching of warehouses at night. Bradstreet. When the lantern was found, the reservoir was how full? Just over half. And the police surgeon, in his report, gave the time of death as roughly midnight to 1 in the morning. He did. On the basis of body temperature and rigor, yes. A lantern of this design, filled to capacity, burns for 10 hours. The reservoir, when filled, holds approximately 4 fluid ounces. At the time of discovery, 3 fluid ounces remained, or thereabouts. What does that signify? It signifies that 1 fluid ounce had been consumed. 1 fluid ounce represents 2.5 hours of burning. If the lantern was first lit at, let us say, the time of the murder, midnight to 1, then by 3 in the morning, 2 to 3 hours of oil should be gone. That fits. It is, in fact, perfectly consistent. Then where is the puzzle? The puzzle, Bradstreet, is that the lantern was not first lit at the time of the murder. The constable's report tells us the lantern was already burning steadily when he approached at 3. A lantern recently lit flickers and pops, and is unsteady for several minutes after lighting. Constable Pike, an experienced riverman, would have noted that. He recorded it as burning steady. Furthermore, the soot upon the glass is heavy. It is the soot of many hours of burning. Not 2, not 3, 6, perhaps 7. Then the lantern had been burning since around 8 in the evening, which is consistent with what the widow said. Carstairs left the house at 7:30. It is consistent, but it tells us something more. It tells us, Watson, that Edmund Carstairs lit that lantern hours before he died, which means Edmund Carstairs went to the wharf, lit his lantern, conducted his business, whatever it was, and was killed in the course of it, hours later, either by someone who came to him during those hours, or by someone who returned to him at midnight when he had not yet left. Returned. Then the killer had been there earlier. The killer had been there earlier. The killer was, in fact, an expected visitor. The killer was someone Carstairs was meeting that night. Bradstreet. I require 3 things. First, A search of Caleb Withers's lodgings for any communication, any letter, any note, any scrap of paper bearing the initials J.P. Second, an immediate inquiry as to whether Mr. Joseph Pegram was at his post at Henniker's No. 2 warehouse between midnight and 3 in the morning of the 3rd of November. The logbook is in his own hand. I want it verified by a second source. Third, the address of the woman whose photograph stands on Mrs. Carstairs' mantelpiece. Mrs. Carstairs will not give it willingly. You will have to ask. She will refuse. You will ask again. Mr. Holmes, the photograph. The photograph, Bradstreet, is of Caleb Withers's wife. His wife. His wife, who left him in March of last year on, I should hazard, a Tuesday, and who has not been seen in his lodgings since. How can you possibly...
The photograph is mounted in a frame of pale ash wood, with a particular maker stamp on the back, which I noted yesterday.
The same frame, the same maker, the same wood, sits on the mantel in Caleb Withers's room. I saw it half an hour ago. Withers's frame is empty. The photograph has been removed. Mr. Holmes, there is something altogether vile in all of this. There is, Bradstreet. There is, and we have not yet found the bottom of it, Watson. We return to Pegram's cottage. Tonight. As Holmes was, for the rest of that afternoon, in one of his blackest humours, he sat in the back room at Baker Street with his knees drawn up to his chin in the basket chair, smoking pipe after pipe of the strongest shag he kept. He did not speak, he did not eat, he did not read. At 4 o'clock, a boy from Bradstreet arrived with a folded paper. Holmes read it. He stood. Watson, the logbook at Henniker's No. 2 warehouse has been verified. Mr. Joseph Pegram was indeed present, signing his rounds at the hour of midnight and again at 1 in the morning. The second signature is countersigned by a casual labourer named Kemp, who was sleeping in the warehouse against the cold and who confirms Pegram's presence. Then Pegram did not kill Carstairs. Then Pegram did not kill Carstairs at midnight. Pegram has an alibi for midnight. And yet, we knocked. The door was opened not by Pegram but by his daughter. Mr. Holmes, Miss Pegram, is your father at home? He is at his work, sir. At Henniker's? At Henniker's. May we come in for a moment? She hesitated. Then she stood aside. The cottage was as it had been. The fire, the canary, the book on the chair. But Alice Pegram was not as she had been. Her hands trembled. Her eyes were red. The book on the chair was the same book, but it had not been read. The bookmark was in the same place. Miss Pegram, I shall be brief. I shall be honest. I beg you to be honest in return. Your father is a good man. Your father has done a great wrong, perhaps, but he has not done the worst wrong in this matter. Will you sit? She sat. She did not look at us. Miss Pegram, did you know Edmund Carstairs? A long silence. Yes, sir. How did you know him? A longer silence. He came to the door, sir, a year ago. He had a letter. A letter you had written. She did not answer. A letter you had written, perhaps, to a young man you ought not to have written to, a young man whose family would not have approved, a young man with whom you had been, perhaps, indiscreet. Sir, please, Miss Pegram, I do not require the details. I do not desire them. I require only this. Edmund Carstairs came to your father with that letter. He said he would give it to the family of the young man. He said this would ruin you. He said your father might prevent this by paying him a small sum regularly into the future. 5 shillings a week. That is what was said? A whisper. Yes. And your father has paid that sum every week for 53 weeks. Yes. And on the 2nd of November, the day before Edmund Carstairs died, something further happened. Something which made the matter no longer something your father could pay away. What was it? She did not answer for a long time. Then she rose. She went to a small drawer in a side table. She unlocked it with a key from a chain about her neck. She took from it a folded piece of paper. She brought it to Holmes. The note was short. It was in a hand I recognized, having seen its like in the small leather book, the hand of Edmund Carstairs. It read, "My dear Miss Pegram, 5 shillings will no longer suffice. The matter has come to my attention that you are with child. The young man's family will pay handsomely, I think, for the knowledge. Or your father will. Either will do. I shall expect to see your father at the Wharf at midnight on Tuesday next. He will know the place. Yours, E.C. You showed this to your father on the morning of the 3rd. On the morning, not before. He had been at his work all night, sir. He came home for breakfast. And he read it then. He read it. He went very white. He said nothing. He drank his tea. He went out again. At what hour? At 9. And he returned? At 11. 2 hours absent. And then the inspector came. They had found the body. Miss Pegram. Your father did not kill Edmund Carstairs at midnight, because at midnight he was at his work. But the inspector has been making inquiries this afternoon, and the inspector has learned that Mr. Joseph Pegram was absent from his rounds for 40 minutes, around 9:30 in the evening, on the night of the 2nd. He left the warehouse. He returned. The casual labourer Kemp confirms it. Where did your father go? I do not know. You do not know, or you do not say. I do not know, Mr. Holmes. I swear it. He did not tell me. I believe you, Miss Pegram. Now I must ask you a different question. The young man, the father of your child, who is he? His name was John Withers. Withers. Any relation to Caleb Withers? His brother. His younger brother. He went to sea last spring. He did not know I was. He did not know. And Caleb Withers? Did he know? He knew. He came once, in September. He gave me money. He said the family must not be told. He said he would handle it. He was kind, sir. He was a kind man. He is dead, Miss Pegram. He was murdered last night. I am sorry to tell you so. She gave no cry. She did not move. She looked at Holmes for a long moment, as though he had spoken in a language she did not know. Then she lowered her head. Then it is all done. Then it is all spoiled. We walked some way without speaking. At the top of Pelican Stairs, Holmes stopped. Watson, the case is, on its face, complete. Joseph Pegram had a motive of the most terrible kind. He was absent from his post for 40 minutes on the night in question. He arrived at the Wharf in the natural course of his duties before any other man but the constable. He knew the Wharf intimately. He had every reason to wish Carstairs dead. He had every reason to wish Caleb Withers dead. Withers knew of his daughter's condition, and was, in the eyes of a frightened father, a witness who might at any moment tell. Then it was Pegram. It is the obvious conclusion, and yet you do not believe it. I do not believe it, Watson, for one reason. The 40 minutes Pegram was absent, from 9:30 to 10 minutes past 10. That is not the time at which Edmund Carstairs was killed. Carstairs was killed at, or shortly after, midnight. The medical evidence is firm on that point. Bradstreet's police surgeon is a careful man, and he is not wrong by 2 hours. Pegram's absence does not place him at the Wharf at the hour of the murder. It places him at the Wharf 2 hours before. Then what did Pegram do during those 40 minutes? He did, I believe, what any father would do. He went to the Wharf. He confronted Edmund Carstairs. He told him there would be no more money. He told him to leave his daughter alone or be exposed as a blackmailer with all the consequences that follow. And he returned to his work. At midnight, he was signing his logbook. At midnight, he was not killing Edmund Carstairs. Then who was? Holmes did not answer at once. He looked at the river. Watson, there is a possibility I have been resisting all afternoon. There is a possibility which, if true, is the cruelest thing in this entire business. There is a possibility that I shall confirm tonight, at 3 in the morning on the wharf, by means of an experiment which I am preparing now in my head, and which Bradstreet, I think, will not like. What is it? I shall not say it yet. Come, we return to Baker Street. I require my Bradshaw, a chemical balance, and 3 hours of silence. At 1 in the morning, we go to the wharf. At 3, I think we shall know. We returned to Baker Street at 5 in the evening. Holmes did not eat. He did not change. He sat himself at the chemical bench in the back, with the lantern from the wharf, and a smaller lantern of his own, which he kept for experiments, and a small balance, and a stopwatch, and a notebook. He spent the first hour weighing the oil that the police had recovered from the lantern. He spent the second hour burning his own lantern, filled with whale oil of the same grade, in a draught-free corner of the room, and weighing it again at intervals. He spent the third hour at the desk, his fingertips pressed to his temples in silence. At 10 in the evening he stood. Watson, the lantern at Dead Man's Wharf burned for at least 7 hours before Constable Pike found it. Possibly 8. Not 2. Not 3. Not 5. 7 or 8. What does that signify? It signifies that the lantern was lit not at midnight, nor at 10, nor even at 8 in the evening. It was lit, at the latest, at 7:30. At the time Carstairs left his house, before Carstairs could have reached the wharf. You mean someone lit it before Carstairs arrived? I mean someone lit it knowing Carstairs would arrive. I mean the lantern was waiting for him. Then someone was there before him, someone who lit the lantern for him. Yes, his killer, possibly, or a confederate, or... Holmes stopped. His face was set. Watson, sit down. I am about to tell you something I cannot prove yet, but which I will prove tonight. The lantern at Dead Man's Wharf was not lit by Edmund Carstairs. The lantern was not lit by Joseph Pegram, who was at his post at 7:30. The lantern was lit by a third person who knew the wharf, who knew Carstairs' habits, who knew the precise hour at which Carstairs would arrive, and who lit the lantern as a beacon, not for a smuggler, not for a confederate, but as a beacon to a fourth person who was watching from elsewhere, who saw the lantern, and who therefore knew the moment had come. Holmes, 4 people now. The killer, the confederate who lit the lantern, the fourth person who responded to the lantern, and Carstairs himself. 4 people, but 2 of them may be the same person. How? The person who lit the lantern at 7:30, knowing Carstairs would arrive after 8, knowing Pegram was on his rounds and would not return until 10, knowing the wharf was deserted at that hour, may have lit the lantern, hidden, watched Carstairs arrive, watched Pegram confront him at 9:30, watched Pegram leave at 10, and then, at midnight, when Carstairs was alone and the wharf was again deserted, descended from the place where they had hidden, struck Carstairs at the chalked X I made yesterday, and departed. The lantern, you see, was not a beacon to summon the killer. The lantern was a clock. The lantern was the killer's own clock. It told the killer when Carstairs was in place. It marked the beginning of the watch, and, by its burning down, the passing of the hours. And when the killer judged that the time was right, the killer acted. Who, Holmes? Who? There is one person who knew the wharf intimately, who knew Carstairs' habits, who had a motive, and the means and the opportunity. There is one person whom we have not yet fully considered. because we have considered her only as a witness, and because she met us composed and dressed in mourning and answered our questions as a wronged woman might. There is one person in this case whom I have until this evening been a fool about. Mrs. Carstairs. Mrs. Carstairs. Holmes. She was at home. She was where? Watson. Did anyone vouch for her whereabouts on the night of the murder? Did the inspector ask? Did the tobacconist downstairs see her? Did a neighbour? Did anyone? I do not know. I have asked. Bradstreet has asked. No one saw her. The tobacconist closes at 7. The neighbours at either side were at a music hall. The street, in the fog, was empty. Mrs. Carstairs was not, so far as anyone knows, at home. She might have been at home. She might equally have been at Dead Man's Wharf. But why? She had no motive that we know of. She did not love her husband, but she did not hate him enough to kill him. She knew of his women, but she did not seem to mind them. She had nothing to gain from his death. They had no money. He had no insurance. She is, as far as we can see, poorer for his death than she was for his life. She is poorer in money. She is perhaps richer in something else. What? Watson, I have read this book 3 times today. There is one matter in it which has been troubling me without my knowing why. There is one set of initials in this book which appears only once. The very last entry but one, 2 days before Carstairs died. Against the initials CW there is a sum of £2, and beneath it, in pencil, 3 words. She has agreed. C.W. Caleb Withers. She has agreed. She has agreed. Holmes. Are you saying... I am saying that on the 31st of October, Edmund Carstairs made a final entry against the name of Caleb Withers. £2. Paid. And the note, she has agreed. Now, Caleb Withers was being blackmailed by Edmund Carstairs. The blackmail involved, almost certainly, Withers's brother John. Withers had been paying. But on the 31st, something changed. She, and there is only one she in Caleb Withers's life who might have entered such a bargain, she had agreed. To what? Mrs. Withers, Caleb's estranged wife, whose photograph stands upon Mrs. Carstairs' mantel. What did she agree to, Holmes? She agreed, Watson, to be the bait. She agreed to lure Edmund Carstairs to the wharf at midnight, on the night of the 3rd. She agreed, I believe, to be the woman Carstairs thought he was meeting. She had been, perhaps, his lover briefly. She knew the wharf. She had her own reasons to hate him. And she agreed to come that night as the assignation. Carstairs would be expecting her. He would have lit the lantern early, as was his habit on Tuesdays. He would have waited. But she did not come. She did not come because while Carstairs waited under the lantern she had agreed to meet him beneath, someone else came in her place. Someone the lantern was waiting for. Not Carstairs' signal at all. The signal of his death. Mrs. Carstairs. Mrs. Carstairs. Who knew her husband better than anyone? Who knew his Tuesdays? Who knew his lantern? Who knew because Caleb Withers had at some point told her that the next assignation was to be the trap. Withers wished Carstairs ruined. Withers wished his brother saved, his own marriage perhaps salvageable. He went to Mrs. Carstairs. He proposed a scheme. His wife would lure Carstairs to the wharf. The two of them, Withers and Mrs. Carstairs, would arrive. They would confront him. They would obtain the leather book by force or by threat. They would burn it. Carstairs would be free of his trade, his victims free of his cruelty, both wronged spouses free of him at last. That was the plan. That was the plan, I think, that Caleb Withers proposed to Mrs. Carstairs. That is the plan Mrs. Withers agreed to. But Mrs. Carstairs had her own plan, and she made it known to neither of them. Mrs. Carstairs went alone. Mrs. Carstairs went alone. She knew the assignation. She knew the wharf. She knew the wharf. She knew the lantern would be lit by 7:30. She arrived, I think, around 8, and hid herself in the warehouse at the head of the wharf, the door of which is broken and gives easily. She watched her husband come down to the wharf. She watched him light no lantern, because the lantern was already lit. She watched him puzzle over this and look about and decide, perhaps, that his confederate had come and gone. She watched Joseph Pegram arrive at 9:30 and confront her husband. She watched Pegram leave. She watched her husband, alone now, waiting for the woman who would not come. And at midnight, when no one had come for over 2 hours, when the fog was at its thickest, when her husband stood at the end of the wharf with his back to the warehouse, she came out and she crossed the boards, and she stabbed him in the chest with a fish-gutting knife such as may be bought for 10p at any tackle shop. On the river, he turned. He reached toward the lantern, perhaps to see her face by its light, perhaps in some last appeal. He fell. She took the leather book from his coat. She left the lantern burning. She walked back up the wharf. She walked home in the fog. Holmes, the motive. The motive, Watson, was the leather book. But the book, she gave us the book. She gave us a book. What do you mean? I mean that the book she gave us this morning, which we have read all afternoon, which I have weighed and turned and studied, that book is a forgery. It is a clever one. The hand is consistent. The dates are plausible. The initials match the records of Whitby and Cobb's employees and neighbours, which I checked this evening by sending Bradstreet's man to the firm's offices. But the original book, the book her husband actually kept, contained other initials. Initials that are not in this book. Initials which would have placed her, Mrs. Carstairs, in a position of terrible vulnerability. Her own initials? Her own, perhaps, or those of someone she loved. There is, I have learned, a younger sister, unmarried, now governess in a house in Hertfordshire. The sister was in London last summer, and there was, thus, the household whispers, an indiscretion. Carstairs had ways of finding such things out. Carstairs had a ledger, and Mrs. Carstairs, who had endured her husband's women, his cruelty, his trade, all of it, Mrs. Carstairs could not endure her sister's name in that book. She killed him for the ledger. She killed him for the ledger. She copied it overnight, leaving out the entry which would have ruined her sister. She altered, perhaps, certain other entries to muddy the trail. She produced it for me this morning when I called, knowing that if I asked the right questions I would find it eventually, and that her producing it freely would prove her innocence. It nearly did. And Caleb Withers? Caleb Withers came to her last night, I think, in some agitation. The murder had not gone as the plan he had proposed. His wife had not been used. He had heard, perhaps, of the death, and went to Mrs. Carstairs to ask what had happened. He realized, I think, what she had done. He threatened to go to the police. She offered him tea, perhaps. She offered him a brandy. She talked him into calm. She suggested he write a note, for some other purpose, a letter to his wife, perhaps, in a phrasing she dictated. And while he wrote, she stood behind him with a small revolver, which she had taken from her husband's drawer that morning, and she shot him. She walked him with the help of someone, a paid man, a porter, a cabman, to his own lodging house. She placed him in his bed. She placed the note. She closed the door. She locked it. She returned the key. She went home. My God, Holmes, it is all hypothesis, Watson. Beautifully arranged hypothesis. I shall now require to prove it, and I shall require to prove it tonight. How? At 3 in the morning, You and I and Inspector Bradstreet shall be at Dead Man's Wharf. The lantern shall be hung. The lantern shall be lit. And we shall send word, through a means I have arranged with Bradstreet's people, to Mrs. Carstairs, that her husband's leather book, the real one, has been found beneath a floorboard in the warehouse at the head of the wharf. We shall let it be known that the constables are to retrieve it at dawn. We shall let it be known that until dawn the warehouse is unguarded. You think she will come for it? I think she will have to come for it, because the real book, Watson, is what she needed to destroy, and she has been 3 days now without knowing whether she truly destroyed it. The book she burned, if she burned, may not have been the right one, or she may not have been certain that her husband kept only one ledger. The thought has been in her mind. The thought has been gnawing at her since she walked off that wharf, and tonight, if I have judged her correctly, she will come. And if she does not come, then I have been wrong, Watson, and a great many things in this case are not what I have made of them, and I shall apologize to her in the morning, but she will come. We took our positions at 2 in the morning. Inspector Bradstreet, with 2 constables, was inside the warehouse at the head of the wharf, behind a screen of empty crates. Holmes and I were in a small recess beside the gate, where the fence joined the brick wall of the next building. We had a clear view of the wharf and the lantern. We could not be seen. The hour from 2 to 3 was the longest I have spent in any vigil of my life. The cold went through my coat in 15 minutes. It went through my flesh in 30. The fog crept along the boards. Once, a rat moved across the wharf, paused beneath the lantern, and moved on. Once, a barge passed on the river, its lamp invisible behind the wall of mist, only its slow horn sounding from a long way off. At 7 minutes to 3, we heard a footstep. She came onto the wharf. She paused at the head of it, where her husband had paused 4 nights before. She looked toward the burning lantern, she looked along the boards, she listened. She walked down the wharf. She stopped at the point where her husband had fallen. She looked down. She stood very still. Then she turned and walked back. She went directly to the warehouse at the head of the wharf, where Bradstreet and his men waited. She tried the door. It opened. She went in. We heard a moment later the sound of a board being lifted. We heard a moment later still Bradstreet's voice. "Mrs. Carstairs, I must ask you to step out from there. I must ask you to surrender what you have in your hand." A long, terrible silence. Then her voice, clear, calm, almost relieved. "It is not here. No, madam, it is not. You knew. We knew, madam. Will you come with us, please?" She walked past the place where her husband had fallen. She did not look at it. She walked the length of the wharf. She passed within 6 feet of where Holmes and I stood, and as she passed, she paused. She turned her head. She looked through the fog, directly at the place where Holmes stood unseen. "Mr. Holmes!" Holmes stepped out. "Mrs. Carstairs, you are very thorough." "It was a thorough crime, madam. Is my sister's name safe?" A pause. "It is. The book has been destroyed. I burned it myself this evening, after I had read it. It contained, as you suspected, an entry which would have been your sister's ruin. That entry no longer exists. It exists only in my memory, and I shall, with your permission, forget it." She did not move. "You burned it." "I did." "Why?" "Because there are 19 names in that book, Mrs. Carstairs, and 18 of them have suffered enough." "And the 19th?" "The 19th is the man you killed, whose suffering, I think, I shall not weep for." She gave the smallest nod. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Mrs. Carstairs, I have not done it for you. I have done it for your sister, who has done no wrong I can see, and for the 18 others who have done such wrongs as may be theirs alone to atone for." You, I cannot help. The murder of Edmund Carstairs perhaps another man might forgive. The murder of Caleb Withers I cannot. He would have spoken. He would have spoken. And he would have been right to. Madam, will you come? I will come. We returned to Baker Street at 5. We did not speak in the cab. We did not speak as we climbed the stair. Mrs. Hudson, who had risen for us, brought tea and toast. We did not eat the toast. Watson? Yes. There was no kindness in this case. Not one act of kindness. There was Caleb Withers. He gave money to Alice Pegram. He gave money to her in the hope his brother would be spared a scandal. There was kindness in it, perhaps. But it was not pure kindness. There was Joseph Pegram. He paid for a year to protect his daughter. He confronted Carstairs at the wharf to save her further harm. There was love in that, Watson. There was the love of a father for his child. That is a kindness, I will allow it. That is the one kindness in this whole sorry business. And the daughter, Holmes. What of her? She will bear the child. Her father will keep her with him at the cottage. The young man, John Withers, will return from sea. In the spring, I have learned, and he will marry her. The brother who would have prevented it is dead. The blackmailer who threatened to ruin it all, is dead. There will be a hard year, but there will be a marriage. That is something. It is the smallest of some things. It is what we have salvaged. Holmes, the lantern. Why did she light it? She did not. You said she did. I said someone did. It was not she. It was, in fact, Edmund Carstairs himself, as he always did, as I had supposed at first. But you said, I said that the lantern's burning time placed its lighting at 7:30. I said this could not have been Carstairs, who left his house at 7:30. But Watson, his house was a quarter of an hour's walk from the wharf. He could not have walked. He could not have arrived. He could not have lit the lantern by 7:30. Therefore someone else lit it. That was the line of reasoning. And it was wrong? It was wrong because his house was a quarter of an hour's walk from the wharf, only if he walked from the front door. He did not walk from the front door. He had business in the area before his assignation. He left his rooms at 7:30. Yes, but he had been near the wharf in the afternoon on his employer's business, at Whitby and Cobb's storage shed not 3 streets away. He went there for a delivery. He took, while there, the opportunity to walk down to the wharf, to light the lantern early, to leave it burning, and to return to his employer's premises to finish his work. He returned to his lodgings only briefly that evening. He went back to the wharf at perhaps 8. The lantern by then had been burning since perhaps 4:30 or 5, so the lantern was, after all, his. The lantern was his, as I first thought, as I should have continued to think. The lantern was the one thing in this case that did not lie. It was the time I had wrong. I corrected it this evening. Then, the trap at the wharf was based not on the lantern but on the book. Mrs. Carstairs was lured by the book, not by the light. The light I rehung tonight, for atmosphere perhaps, for symmetry, perhaps for myself. I wanted to see it burning over the place where her husband had died. I wanted to see it once more before this case ended. It is a small vanity, Watson. Forgive me. You are forgiven. Thank you. Holmes, the clues. You said there were clues a careful watcher might have seen. What were they? There were several. There were 2 principally. The first was Mrs. Carstairs' question on her first visit to this room about her husband's pocketbook. She did not ask how he died. She did not ask where. She did not ask why. She asked about the pocketbook. Now, she had explained this as a wish to know whether he had been with a woman. But the pocketbook contained, we now know, the small leather ledger of his blackmail trade. She knew the ledger was in the pocketbook. She wished to know whether it had been recovered by the police. If it had, she could not act. If it had not, she knew it was either still on the wharf, or at the bottom of the river, or in some other place where she might yet retrieve it. Her question was not about her husband's women. It was about the ledger. I noted the question at the time. I noted it carelessly. I should have noted it harder. And the second? The second was the soot on the lantern hook. There was none. The lantern, when hung, had been burning long enough for the wick to settle. This pointed at first to a long-prepared, deliberately staged crime. But it pointed equally, on reflection, to the simpler and truer factude. Carstairs lit it and hung it himself, hours before he was killed. Exactly as had been his custom for many Tuesdays, the lantern, again, was not a stage prop. It was the dead man's own. The soot on the glass, the absence on the hook, the smell of the oil, they all told the same story, if I had been listening properly. I was distracted by the staging. The killer had staged so much else. I assumed the lantern was staged too. It was not. It was the most honest object in the case. And the third clue, Holmes? You said two, principally. Was there a third? There was a third, but I would not call it a clue. I would call it a confession. The leather book, Watson. The book she gave us herself. It contained, when I weighed it carefully, and compared the depth of ink and the wear of the leather, signs of having been bound very recently. The leather of the cover was supple at the spine, where an old buck's spine would have stiffened. The ink at the early entries was no older than the ink at the late. A book kept in daily use for 16 months would not show that consistency. The book she gave us was perhaps 2 days old. The forgery, in its very physical condition, betrayed itself. Then you knew this morning. I suspected this morning. I was certain by this evening. The trap I set was, in some sense, only the formal confirmation. Watson, there will be a trial. She will be hanged. Yes, her sister will live. Yes, Alice Pegram will marry her sailor. In the spring. The 18 others will be left alone. They will. Then perhaps something has been salvaged. Perhaps that is all that can be said. Come. Mrs. Hudson, I think, has more tea, and the morning, for the first time in 9 days, is clear. The trial of Helena Carstairs was held in February of 1890. She did not contest the charge. She did not raise her veil in court. She wrote before her sentence 3 letters, one to her sister, who I am told received it, and never opened it. One to the family of Caleb Withers, who returned it, unread, and one to Sherlock Holmes, who burned it in this fire without opening it on the morning her sentence was carried out. I asked him once why he had burned it. He said, only that some words ought never to be answered. The wharf was demolished in 1893. The warehouses were sold. The land was filled and built upon, and there is no longer any trace of the place where Edmund Carstairs died. But there is, sometimes on certain nights when the fog comes thick off the river, and the lamps along the embankment seem to dim, a small steady glow at the place where the lantern used to hang. I do not believe in such things, neither did Holmes. If this story held you to the end, the case of the bishop's glove waits on screen now. It begins with a man who walked into a cathedral on a Sunday morning and walked out a stranger to his own name. Subscribe and walk with us through the fog.